I don't remember the sound of the slap, just the way my face stung afterward and how the whole gym went silent. You know that kind of silence, when something so wrong just happened, but nobody's ready to admit it? That was the sound echoing through the rows of uniforms, pressed ties, and forced smiles. That was the sound that stuck to my skin more than the slap itself. My name is Julian Reyes, and I was 17 the day a grown man, an honored guest, hit me in front of 600 students, my principal, and my mom. It wasn't just any man. It was Commander Ray Dalton, retired Navy, local hero, and the guy my school board practically worshipped. He was invited to speak at the Patriot Awards Assembly at Lancaster Military Prep, a school that cared more about image than impact. I was top of my class, one of the few openly gay cadets, and probably the only student who kept his dreams taped inside a locker instead of posting them online. You'd think it was about me being gay. It wasn't, not entirely. It started with a flag, a small rainbow pin on my lapel. Subtle, tiny, almost invisible unless you look close. I wore it to honor my cousin Daniel. He served in the Army and came out 2 months before getting discharged. That little pin? It was the only piece of him I had after he took his life last year. Commander Dalton noticed it while he was on stage, ranting about real values and how this generation confuses freedom with feelings. I wasn't even looking at him when he called me out. He said, "Front row Reyes, right?" My stomach dropped. I stood straighter, confused. "Yes, sir." He stepped down from the podium. You could hear his boots hit the gym floor. Then he walked up, stood inches from my face, looked me dead in the eye, and slapped me. Not a punch, not a playful tap. A slap, loud, sharp, humiliating. The pin flew off and landed near my feet. The gym gasped. My mom stood up in the bleachers. But nobody moved. Not the principal, not the teachers, not even my closest friend, Kale, who was frozen mid-clap. Dalton barked. "You wear that in uniform? You think you're honoring your country? Son, you're mocking it." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The principal cleared his throat and stepped forward. Let's maintain order. Commander Dalton is illustrating the importance of uniform integrity. I wasn't stupid. I knew what they were doing. Brushing it off. Calling it a lesson. Trying to keep the school's reputation clean. Like that mattered more than what just happened. My mom tried to reach me, but security stopped her. Dalton turned to the crowd and shouted, "Discipline starts with respect. Respect for history. Respect for what the uniform means." I wanted to yell. I wanted to explain. But I've been trained too well. So I stood there. Still. Small. And I said what they wanted to hear. "I didn't mean any disrespect, sir." But I felt it. Something inside me cracked. Not from the slap, but from the way no one did a thing. 3 hours later, I sat in the nurse's office. Not because I was hurt, but because they needed me out of the way. Cooling off, they called it. Like I'd done something wrong. The door opened. I expected my mom, maybe Kale. Instead, it was a woman in an Air Force jacket. She didn't smile, just sat across from me and said, "Julian, I'm Major Leland." I saw everything. My chest tightened. I was shadowing Commander Dalton's visit. Unofficial observation. What happened today won't be ignored. Histoire de rire. Was this a test? Another performance? She pulled a photo out of her folder. "My cousin Daniel. You wrote this man's name in a letter to the Department of Defense, correct?" "I nu did, blinking fast." "Well, that letter reached someone who cares. And they sent me here." My fingers curled into fists. "It won't matter. Nothing ever does." She tilted her head. "Not unless you help make it matter." By that evening, social media exploded. Someone in the crowd had filmed it. A 7-second video. The slap, the gasp, the silence. No caption needed. It spread like wildfire. Hashtag Slap for Pride was trending by midnight. By morning, the press showed up at the school gate. My name leaked. So did the letter I'd written about Daniel. Some called me brave. Others called me a disgrace. The school issued a statement saying the incident was under review. Commander Dalton? He said nothing. Not until 72 hours later, when a news anchor cornered him outside a grocery store. He smiled, said, "Boys these days are soft. A slap used to mean something." And just like that, the internet lost its mind. But the truth? that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came a week later, when I found out Kale, the guy who used to sneak Skittles into my locker and knew every part of my story, told the local paper I baited the commander for attention, said I wore the pin to make a political statement, said he was worried about the school's image. That betrayal cut deeper than the slap. It made me question everything. Who was really on my side? Why did people only love you when you were quiet? That Friday, my mom and I sat in the living room, the lights dim, TV muted. She held the rainbow pin in her hand like it was glass. I should have rushed you, she whispered. I shouldn't have let them stop me. I leaned on her shoulder. You raised me right, Mom. That's why I didn't hit back. She smiled a little, her eyes wet. You sure you want to keep fighting this? I thought about Daniel, about Kale, about the kids who messaged me online, saying they were scared too. I nodded. Then we fight smart, she said. A few days later, I got a call. Not from a reporter, not from a lawyer, from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and surprisingly familiar. Julian Reyes, she said. This is Secretary of Defense Grace Langley. I believe we need to talk. You're not in trouble, the Secretary of Defense said. In fact, I think you might be the start of something bigger than any of us imagined. I stared at the phone, then put it back to my ear. I'm sorry, did you say? Secretary Langley. I did, she replied. Julian, we received your letter. We've also seen the video, and we've seen how your school and certain people handled it. I couldn't speak, could barely even sit up. My mom sat across from me with her tea, watching carefully. We'd like to meet, the secretary continued. In person, discreetly, not for media. Just you and a few people who believe your story deserves more than silence. 3 days later, I was flown to Washington, D.C. under a name that wasn't mine. I'd never been on a plane before. They didn't put me in a hotel. They placed me in a government-run youth leadership facility that looked more like a dorm than a safe house. No cameras, no press, just me, a few military advisors, and someone I didn't expect. Kale, except he wasn't there for an apology. I didn't know they invited you too, I said, voice cold, trying to keep the tremble down. He didn't look smug this time, just tired. I didn't know they were inviting you at all, he said. Langley's team called me after the video blew up. I guess because I've been in RODC and already passed a few federal clearances. I raised an eyebrow. So now you're suddenly a good guy again? No, he said, almost too quickly. I screwed up. What I said to the press wasn't true. I was scared. I thought if I stayed out of it, they'd leave me alone. But they didn't. They still investigated me, still went through my texts. I remember the nights Kale and I used to sneak out of morning drills and lay on the football field staring up at stars like they meant something. I remembered the first time he held my hand, and the last time, which was 2 weeks before the slap. So what are we doing here? I asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he sat beside me close. And for a minute, we were just two boys sitting too close in a room, too quiet, our hearts louder than any orders the world had ever shouted at us. I missed you, he said finally, his voice low. I wanted to tell him to freak off. I wanted to shove him, but I didn't, because part of me still remembered what it felt like to be seen, really seen, by him. That night, when the lights were out and our separate rooms darkened, I heard a soft knock at my door. Kale. He didn't say anything. Just stepped in, wearing gym shorts and a quiet kind of apology. I couldn't sleep, he said. I'm not surprised, I muttered, half joking. I kept thinking about you. About that moment when Dalton slapped you. I should have done something. I should have run to you. My chest tightened. Then why didn't you? He looked down. Because I wasn't brave like you. And then, gently, like he was asking permission, he touched my hand. We stood there in the dark for a long moment. Neither of us moved until I leaned in, forehead resting against his. No words, just closeness. Like maybe, just maybe, we could find a version of ourselves untouched by fear or shame. What happened next wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was slow, intentional. Two boys in borrowed time, letting silence speak for what we couldn't yet say. When our lips met, it wasn't fireworks. It was a memory rekindled. When our bodies touched, it wasn't lust. It was longing wrapped in the kind of warmth that felt like forgiveness. We didn't need to undress each other completely, just enough to let the weight we'd both been carrying fall between us, if only for the night. And when it was over, when our heads rested side by side on the same pillow, I looked at him and whispered, "You don't get to walk away again." He nodded. "Then I'll walk beside you." The next morning, Secretary Langley's aide arrived. "Both of you. Conference room A. Now." Kale and I exchanged a look, then followed. The room was filled with a few sharp-faced officials. Langley herself at the head, her nails perfectly clean, her uniform sharp enough to cut glass. "Julian." "Kale." "Sit," she said. "We did." She slid a folder across the table toward me. "We're launching a new pilot program for young cadets across the country, focused on ethics, inclusion, and real leadership. We'd like you to help build it." My eyes widened. "Wait me." She nodded. "We believe the system's broken. You were the crack that let the light in. We want more light." Kale added, "And the school?" Langley gave a tight smile. "Lancaster Military Prep is now under federal review. Commander Dalton's honorary contracts have been revoked. He's being investigated for conduct across multiple speaking events. You weren't the first, just the first who stood still long enough for the world to notice." My hand shook. I thought about all the kids at school who sat through years of speeches without knowing their value. I thought about Daniel, about that rainbow pin, about how much he would have given to feel this scene. "I want to help," I said, "but I don't want this to be a one-time headline. I want to make sure this means something." Langley leaned forward. "That's why you're here." When we returned to campus, it was chaos. Protests, reporters, flyers with my face printed next to the word integrity. I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be useful. And that's when the letters started arriving. Not from politicians, from students. Quiet ones, angry ones, scared ones. One from a boy in Texas who'd been kicked out of ROTC for refusing to cut his hair like a man. Another from a girl in Illinois who said she wore a binder under her uniform because she wasn't ready to say, "I'm trans," but she knew someday she would. Each letter was its own quiet rebellion. And I realized this was more than a moment. It was a movement. A month later, I stood on the Lancaster Prep stage, the same one where Dalton slapped me, and looked out at a sea of cadets. This time, it was me behind the mic. "Respect," I said, "isn't obedience. It's not silence. And it sure as heck isn't fear." I saw Kale in the crowd, arms folded, his smile soft. I pulled the rainbow pin from my pocket and held it high. This isn't just a symbol. It's a promise. That no one here, no one anywhere, will ever have to earn their dignity. You already have it. And for the first time in that gym's long, rigid history, they clapped. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. You know that feeling when you take 2 steps forward and the ground suddenly gives way beneath you? Yeah, that. I've been back at Lancaster Prep for barely 2 weeks when the rumors started. They're going to shut down the cadet program. Julian ruined the honor code. Boys are wearing rainbow pins now. What's next? Glitter rifles. At first, I laughed it off, until I saw the new instructor, Major Darren Holt, a man whose reputation was whispered through military forums and student Reddit threads like folklore. Strict, decorated, and deeply opposed to rebranding tradition. He arrived without ceremony. No speeches, just a clipboard, dark sunglasses, and a permanent scowl. He observed us in silence for the first few days. Didn't say a word to me. Not once. Then Friday morning, during drills, he called me out. "Cadet Rivera," he barked. Front and center. I stepped forward, chin up. The sun was sharp above us. "Sir." He looked me over like I was something he didn't order but got stuck with anyway. "I read your file. The letters. The scholarship. The pin." He tapped his chest where my rainbow flag sat, neatly pinned just above my name tag. "You think this makes you a hero?" I said nothing. Because what it makes you is a distraction. Behind me, I could hear someone suck in a breath. "I don't care what the defense secretary handed you. You're still under my command now. And under me, we don't do politics. We do discipline." Kale took a step forward from formation, fists clenched. I shook my head slightly. "Is that clear?" Major Holt asked. I nodded. "Crystal, sir." But in my chest, something started to burn. That night, Kale came to my dorm after lights out. "Don't let him get in your head," he said, pulling off his jacket. "He's just another broken man clinging to the past." "I can handle him," I said, trying to sound tougher than I felt. Kale stepped closer. "You shouldn't have to. Not alone." He kissed me. Slow, reassuring. Like we had time. We didn't. Because on Monday, the attack came. Not with fists. Not with words. With grades. My evaluations plummeted overnight. Perfect drill scores marked incomplete. Uniform checks marked non-compliant. My speech at the assembly? Stripped from the academy's online archive. When I confronted my ethics professor, he lowered his voice and whispered, "It's above me now, Julian. Major Holt's overseeing all reviews. He's cleaning house." I stared at my report, then back at him. "So I'm just collateral damage?" He didn't answer, just looked away. Kale and I started sneaking off again like the early days. We'd meet by the old pool shed behind the south track, wrapped in darkness, speaking in whispers like the walls had ears. "They want you to crack," he said one night. "They want you to fight so they can call you disruptive. Or worse, unstable." I leaned back against the brick wall. "They're rewriting my story while it's still being written. Then let's rewrite it back." He looked at me, a plan already forming behind his eyes. 2 weeks later, a leaked memo surfaced online. Anonymous source, unverified but loud. It outlined a quiet behavioral redirection strategy targeting influential cadets with non-traditional visibility. Translation: the school had a plan to discipline queer students without triggering lawsuits or bad press. They've been testing it on me. And Kale? He'd found the file. Hacked it, actually. I left no trail, he promised. Used a burner laptop, logged in from the student Wi-Fi, encrypted everything twice. You could get expelled. He shrugged. We're already standing on the edge. May as well jump. We submitted the file to Secretary Langley's office and waited. But that same night, I got pulled from class by 2 campus guards. This way, Cadet Rivera. I followed, silent. They led me past the administration wing, down a corridor I didn't even know existed. The lights flickered. The air smelled like old paper and power. Inside a gray room sat Major Holt. He didn't look angry, just amused. "We found traces of unauthorized access to the school's internal server," he said. "From your dorm hall. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I said nothing. See, what disappoints me most isn't the rule breaking. It's the arrogance. You think your story matters more than the institution that raised you. That just because you got a medal and a headline, you're untouchable. I met his stare. I think the institution should serve the people in it, not the other way around. He leaned back. "Goo, let me ask you something, Cadet Rivera. What's more important to you, being right or being respected?" I didn't even blink. Respect that's forced isn't real. Holt stood, walked around the table, then quietly dropped a sealed letter in front of me. "Effective immediately," he said. "You're suspended pending investigation." The door opened behind me, and just like that, I was escorted off the campus. Outside the gates, Kale was waiting. "You knew," I said. He nodded once. "Langley's team called. They said they'd intercepted the disciplinary request, but they're letting the school follow protocol to show its hand." I stared at the gates. My lungs felt tight. "What now?" Kale reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. It was an invitation to speak at the National LGBTQ+ Military Youth Summit in Chicago. "They want you," he said. "The world wants you." I took the paper, and suddenly I wasn't afraid anymore. That weekend, I stood in a conference room filled with people who looked like me, loved like me, dreamed like me. And when I spoke, I didn't just tell my story. I told our story of silence and resistance, of tradition twisted into control, of what it means to serve when the system doesn't serve you back. I talked about Daniel, about Kale, about the weight of pretending, and the joy of finally standing upright. When I stepped off that stage, something shifted, not outside, but in me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. That night, in the hotel room Kale and I shared, we lay side by side, staring at the ceiling. "You ever wonder what it would have been like if none of this had happened?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said. But then I remember I'd still be hiding. You'd still be scared. And Daniel, he'd still be gone. Cale nodded. Then I'm glad it happened. I turned to face him. Even the slap? He smiled sadly. Even the slap. But across the country, a storm was brewing. Major Holt had made a call. To someone with more power, fewer morals, and a very personal vendetta. And this time, it wasn't just my scholarship or my file they were after. It was everything. The letter came in a plain manila envelope. No name, no return address. Inside, a copy of my file marked with red ink. Every grade, every disciplinary flag, every whisper that had ever been recorded about me. But it was the final page that stopped my breath. A formal request for expulsion from Lancaster Prep, citing conduct inappropriate for a representative of National Youth Service. Signed by the Board of Governors. 7 people I had never met. 7 strangers who now had the power to erase everything I had built. The kicker? It was leaked. By morning, my name was trending online again, but not as a hero. As a fraud. Hashtag uniform not unicorn. Hashtag fake cadet Julian. Hashtag no politics in prep. They posted screenshots of my social media, old photos with friends, a shirtless selfie from 3 summers ago, and a blurry image of Cale and me kissing outside a student dorm, taken without our knowledge. Suddenly, I wasn't a cadet. I was a spectacle. I've seen smear campaigns, Langley's assistant said over Zoom. But this is surgical. Someone's scared of what you represent. They're trying to break the symbol, Cale added. I sat there quiet, because they weren't just trying to break a symbol. They were trying to break me. 2 days later, I got called to testify at a closed disciplinary hearing. Major Holt sat at the end of the table. Behind him were school officials, board members, and a few civilian observers. Not one wore a rainbow pin. Julian Rivera, the chairman began, you've been accused of undermining institutional values, engaging in unauthorized political activity, and acting in a manner unbecoming of a cadet leader. How do you plead? I looked at him, then scanned the room. I plead human. A murmur went through the crowd. Sir, I continued, with respect, what values are we preserving if honesty, courage, and integrity are treated as threats? You're not on a podium now, Cadet, Holt said sharply. No, I'm in a room full of people deciding my future behind closed doors. That's worse. There was silence. Then came the evidence. Printouts, photos, select quotes from interviews I had given. Edited videos that twisted my speeches into something radical, almost threatening. They even brought up my relationship with Cale. Is it appropriate, one board member asked, for cadets to engage in intimate relationships while representing the academy? We followed every rule, I said. There are straight couples holding hands in the mess hall, but I guess only some relationships get labeled distractions. The room tightened. Your tone is combative, Holt warned. My existence is not an argument, I said. But if you insist on treating it like one, then yeah, I'll fight back. That night, I received an anonymous message. A video, grainy but unmistakable. It showed Holt standing in the hallway outside the command wing, speaking with a local politician, a known donor. We'll force the board's hand, Holt was saying. We'll frame it as restoring discipline. Keep the feds out of it. Can we link him to policy violations? The politician asked. Leave that to me. The file was dated 2 weeks before my first suspension. They planned this. I forwarded it to Langley's office. Then Cale and I sat in silence. They're not playing chess, I finally said. They're playing dirty. The next morning, the school issued a press release. Cadet Julian Rivera has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. While we respect the diversity of our student body, we must ensure our values remain intact. Respect the diversity. They were saying the quiet part louder now. The same day, Cale received a letter of reassignment. Effective immediately, Cadet Vega will report to the Oklahoma Youth Defense Training Camp for leadership immersion. Translation? They were exiling him. We spent that night in my room. Not in anger, not in fear, but in the kind of quiet that only comes when 2 people know something big is ending. I'll fight it, he said, tracing circles on my shoulder. I'll tell Langley they want to split us, I said softly. That's the game. Divide and destroy. He nodded, eyes wet but unblinking. I'm not leaving you, he said. But the next morning, he was gone. I returned to the hearing alone. But I wasn't alone for long. Because that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A protest. Students, parents, local alumni, standing outside the academy gates with signs, flags, and camera crews. Let Julian speak. Pride is not a violation. We deserve leaders like him. Langley's office had shared the leaked video. It spread like wildfire. Suddenly, Major Holt was on defense. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I had leverage. You have one option, Langley told the board. Reinstate Cadet Rivera and launch an independent inquiry. Or we escalate this federally, and I promise it will not end quietly. I was called into the boardroom that evening. No ceremony, no apologies. Just a single sentence from the chairman. You are reinstated. Effective immediately. I stood there, heart pounding. And then I said something I hadn't planned. I'm grateful. I began, but I want to clarify something. I'm not coming back to survive. I'm coming back to lead. And I'm not doing it silently. Holt rose from his seat. Then this academy is doomed. No, I said. It's finally waking up. Back on campus, things weren't the same. The silence in the hallways had cracked. Cadets who used to avoid me now nodded. Some even stopped to talk. A few wore tiny rainbow pins under their lapels. But Cale wasn't there. And even with the winds, the loneliness still stung. I thought maybe he'd text, call, send a sign. Nothing. Until 3 weeks later, a small envelope arrived. Inside was a single photograph. Cale, standing on a red dirt field, hand over heart, with a note that read, still yours, still fighting. I held the photo to my chest. And I knew this wasn't the end. Not of the battle. Not of the love. Not of the story. 3 weeks after my reinstatement, the campus felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence of watched footsteps. The kind where people stare but don't speak. Smile but don't trust. Everyone was waiting for me to mess up again. Something small they could twist, stretch, post online. I was no longer invisible. I was radioactive. I threw myself into everything. Coursework, drills, mentoring first years, even tutoring kids who used to call me pretty boy behind my back. Not because I wanted their approval, because I needed to outrun the spotlight they'd pinned to my back. That's the thing about being the first. You're never just you. You're all of us. Every smile I gave had to be perfect. Every word, measured. Every mistake, lethal. And in the middle of it all, Cale was still gone. I got 1 letter a week. Never more than a paragraph. No calls. No video. Just his handwriting, tight, neat, and controlled. Like he was trying not to give away too much. Like he was afraid someone was watching. Still fighting, he wrote. Training's intense, but I keep your photo in my locker. One cadet asked why I smile when I run. I told him it was classified. The silence between each letter was louder than any shout. The breaking point came on a Monday. I was pulled out of leadership workshop and told to report to the comms room. Waiting there, a polished woman in a navy suit, red heels, and a press badge. I'm Deirdre Kane, she said, extending a hand. National Feature Weekly. We're doing a profile on you. I blinked. Me? You've become a lightning rod, she said with a slight smile. Hero. Controversy. Trailblazer. It's good TV. I didn't like the way she said it. Still, part of me hoped this was the break I needed. A chance to tell my story, my real story. We talked for 2 hours. She asked about the slap. About Holt. About Cale. I told her the truth. How I'd grown up hiding. How Cale taught me not to apologize for being seen. How leadership meant protecting the people who couldn't always protect themselves. She nodded, took notes, even cried once, or at least pretended to. I went to bed that night with something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. The article dropped 4 days later. Front cover. My face, photoshopped against the American flag. Headline, The Cadet Who Split a Nation. The piece wasn't about my courage. It was about my agenda. King quoted me out of context, cherry-picked moments to paint me as manipulative, ambitious, calculating. The kind of gay kid who used politics to leapfrog others and weaponized victimhood for visibility. And worst of all, she included Cale's name, full name, and a quote he'd written me in private. "I'm not afraid to love him. Not anymore." It had been in a letter. She must have seen it in my dorm. They turned our story into ammunition. Cale called me that night from a landline. "You said I was safe," he whispered. "I didn't know," I whispered back. "I swear, I didn't know she'd—" "I'm being investigated," he said. "They're calling it fraternization." Said I compromised the chain of command. "No," I said, panic rising. "No, this is my fault. You trusted the wrong people," he said quietly. "And now we both pay." The line went dead. I punched the wall. Blood smeared across my knuckles. I didn't even care. Because for the first time since this all began, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Being visible has a price. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't one Cale should have to pay. I avoided the dining hall for a week. Skipped media training. Cut back on public appearances. Some said I was sulking. What I was really doing. Thinking. About what kind of leader I wanted to be. About whether being a symbol was even worth it. The turning point came in the form of an unlikely ally. Captain Rena. She was one of the Academy's combat instructors. Tough, quiet, intimidating. I'd barely exchanged 5 words with her before. But she found me on the track one night, running alone, and tossed me a bottle of water. "You screwed up," she said without preamble. "You trusted the press." I nodded. "But you also lit a fuse," she continued. "People are talking now. Really talking." I looked up. And you got 2 options," she said. "You can fade out. Play it safe. Or you can finish what you started." "Ow," I asked. "They're gutting Cale's future." "Mine too." Rena smiled. Then she pulled something from her jacket. A list of alumni. Contact. High-ranking officers. Names I recognized. Some who had never publicly supported us before. They're watching. Waiting. One clean move, Julian, and you flip the whole board. So I made a choice. No more hiding. No more careful. If they wanted a gay cadet with an agenda, I'd give them one. An agenda of truth. Of fairness. Of actual leadership. I went public. Held my own press conference on the Academy lawn. Not under the school's banner. Under my own. No more twisting our stories into threats, I told the cameras. No more treating courage like controversy. I demanded Cale's investigation be dropped. I called out Major Holt by name. I cited the video again. The shady expulsion attempt. The smear. The media flooded in. But this time, the story was mine. The fallout came fast. A second protest. Then a student walkout. An alumni letter calling for Holt's resignation. Then, finally, a statement from the Defense Education Council. An internal review is underway regarding disciplinary discrepancies and alleged misconduct at Lancaster Prep. Cale called me again, this time from his personal phone. "They're moving me back," he said. "Transfer's been reversed. Charges dropped." I didn't say anything. I was too busy crying. But even with Cale coming back, I knew this wasn't a fairy tale ending. Too many people still hated us. Too many looked at us and saw a threat, not a story. I won a battle, maybe, but the war? That was still ahead. And yet, that night, under a thunderstorm sky, I stood outside the barracks and saw him walking up the path. Bay Oa shoulder. Uniform rumpled from the road. He didn't speak. Neither did I. We just held each other. Hard. Fierce. Wordless. And for a moment, the world fell away. People think the hard part is coming out. But the hard part is what comes after, when people know and then decide what to do with that knowledge. Some look at you like you've grown wings. Others like you've pulled a pin from a grenade. For me and Cale, we had no wings. Just a long, narrow hallway full of whispers, glances, and doors that used to open a lot easier than they do now. The week after his return, Lancaster Prep became a battlefield. Not with weapons, but with policy. 3 instructors were reassigned. The diversity office suddenly shut down for renovation. They introduced a new behavior review board with no students or faculty of color, and absolutely no queer representation. They called it safeguarding discipline. I called it revenge in a suit. Cale and I met in secret. Same library alcove. Same bench near the east track. Once, even the supply closet behind the chemistry lab. "Tell me this ends," he whispered one night, pressing his forehead to mine. "I can't," I said, "but I can tell you I'm not letting them take this away." I should have known the next hit was coming. It arrived like a brick through a window. Not literal, but it felt just as violent. A new policy. No cadet may engage in relationships, public or private, that conflict with the institution's moral integrity or undermine its traditions. They didn't say our names. They didn't have to. Everyone knew. The day after it passed, Major Holt summoned me. His office smelled like dust and something else, something sharp, bitter. He stood perfectly still, hands behind his back. "You've embarrassed this institution enough," he said calmly. "It's time you considered other opportunities." I swallowed. "You want me to quit?" He smiled, like it wasn't personal. "Resign gracefully, and you keep your recommendations. You'll even get a commendation for public relations under pressure. And if I don't," the smile vanished. "We start digging Cadet Vale. Everyone has something to lose." They went after Cale first. They leaked a redacted psych report from basic training. Said he had impulse control issues, though none of it had ever led to formal action. Then they claimed his relationship entanglements affected his objectivity in drills. His command status was frozen. Suspended from combat leadership rotation. Then came the rumor mill that I'd only gotten my rank through political favors, that I seduced my way into interviews, that I was a plant. It felt like drowning in clear water. Everyone could see you, but no one moved to help. Some people nodded at me in the halls like nothing had changed. Others turned corners when I walked past. Even a few of my friends, real ones, started to create distance. They were afraid. I didn't blame them. I did what I always did when I felt powerless. I acted. That week, I submitted a formal request for policy review to the Board of Governors. Included were affidavits from other queer cadets, testimonies, documentation of bias in coursework, evaluation, and disciplinary decisions. I titled the report, "The Line You Drew and the People You Erased." 3 days later, I was called into an off-the-record meeting with a civilian lawyer attached to the academy. She was nervous. Her tie was crooked. "We've been advised to offer a settlement," she said, "to avoid further escalation." I blinked. "Settlement. You'll withdraw the report. Graduate quietly. We'll seal any records of dispute. In exchange, you get early access to advanced placement tracks. Potential private sponsorship. And Cale." She paused. "He stays as long as you stay quiet." "Il sert derrière." This was what it looked like, systemic pressure wrapped in a handshake. I didn't even ask for time to think. I stood up. "Tell them no," I said. "Tell them I'm not for sale." That night, Cale and I sat on the academy roof, staring at the dark. "I'm scared," he said. "I am too," I replied. "You know they'll find something," he whispered. "They always do." I nodded. "But you know what scares them more?" He looked at me. "That we're still here," I said. "That they pushed this hard and we didn't go quietly." 2 days later, I was stripped of my cadet leadership position. No more morning briefings. No more leading teams. They called it rotation, but the schedule never changed. Cale was reassigned to grounds logistics, far from drills, far from cadets. We were ghosts in the house we helped build. But then something strange happened. Others started stepping forward. Cadets who'd stayed silent. One came to me during morning inspection, slipped a folded paper in my hand. A copy of her own report of bias. It had been buried. Another left a note in my locker. "They pushed you to the edge. You're still standing." That gave the rest of us hope. By week's end, 10 cadets had joined me in drafting a new grievance proposal. 20 signed it. Then 50. We created a digital archive. Anonymous stories. Documented incidents. Suggestions for reform. We called it Project Treadstone. And suddenly, we weren't just resisting. We were building. The administration's response? Clamp down. More restrictions. Integrity checks. A new clause banning the use of academy servers for non-sanctioned activism. They were losing control, and that made them dangerous. The final blow came quietly. Cale was summoned for an urgent family issue, told to pack for temporary leave. When he landed at home, there was no emergency. There was just a letter waiting for him. his transfer orders, effective immediately. They'd exiled him without telling me. I found out through a friend on duty rotation. No goodbye, no warning, just silence. Again, I didn't cry this time. I didn't scream. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat in the dark for hours. Then I wrote one more letter. To the board, to the press, to everyone watching. You say we don't belong, that our love corrupts, that our visibility is dangerous. But I'm still here, and the people you tried to erase, they're watching too. They didn't announce Kale's transfer. No photos, no flux, no honor, just gone. And I almost followed, not out of defeat, but out of rage. I started writing resignation letters, one for every department that had ever praised me, pushed me, or pretended to protect me. But before I hit send, a message landed in my inbox. Subject, still watching. No sender listed, just a file link. I clicked it. Inside, dozens of anonymous testimonials. Some from current cadets, some from alumni, and some from staff still hiding behind layers of fake names and encrypted emails. There were stories of shame, of fear, of what people endured to survive behind Lancaster's polished curtain. But they weren't just complaints. They were calls to action. We need to rebuild from within, one said. Tell our story louder, another wrote. They can push you out, but they can't unmake your voice. That was the moment I understood. This was never just about me and Kale. It was bigger than both of us. I went back to my room, put on my dress uniform, looked in the mirror and saw two people looking back, the cadet who followed the rules and the man who had outgrown them. And I thought, which one deserves to graduate? The answer, both. Because change doesn't happen from the outside shouting in. Sometimes it happens from the inside, refusing to move. Graduation day. They didn't want me to speak. But the class took a vote. For the first time in school history, the valedictory address was chosen by students, not assigned by admin. And they chose me. I stood at the podium, my notes in hand. The audience looked polished, proud. Uniforms starched, medals gleaming. But my heart raced for one person not in the crowd. Kale, I want to tell you a story, I began, about a cadet who followed every rule until he realized the rule book was broken. There were small shifts in the crowd. People leaning forward. He thought his job was to be the best, the most precise, the most invisible. But then someone brave showed him what it meant to be seen. That's when I paused, because I saw him, Kale, in civilian clothes, standing just beyond the last row next to my mother. He smiled just once, just enough. And I knew I was not alone. I'll leave you with this, I said. Don't mistake silence for discipline. Don't call invisibility success. And don't think traditions are excuses to stop evolving. Because one day, someone will come through these halls who doesn't look like you, love like you, pray like you. And you'll have a choice, draw a line, or build a bridge. And the world? It will remember which one you chose. 6 months later, we launched the Cadet Collective, a peer-led mentorship network for LGBTQ plus cadets and allies. It was small at first. A Zoom call, a shared folder, a Slack group buried under code names. Then came interviews, grants, national press. We held our first roundtable last fall with schools across the country. Our slogan? Respect isn't silent. As for Kale and me, we moved to D.C. He's training for search and rescue operations. I work with a nonprofit focused on equality in military education programs. We still argue over takeout orders, still leave the lights on too long, still finish each other's sentences. And sometimes, when the world feels especially cruel, we walk past the Capitol at night, hand in hand, just to remind ourselves we're still here and still fighting. People ask me now, was it worth it? The fights, the isolation, the days I couldn't breathe. And my answer? Yes. Because when someone else walks through those academy doors, someone brown, queer, scared, and brilliant, maybe they won't have to fight alone. Maybe they won't have to fight at all. Before you go, let me leave you with this. If you were in my shoes, targeted by a system that taught you to serve it, how would you fight back? If loving someone openly risked your future, if telling the truth meant isolation, but silence meant erasure, If standing your ground meant losing everything you'd worked for, what would you do to build a better legacy? Because one day, someone might ask you to speak up, and in that moment, you'll decide what kind of world we all wake up in.